Hi everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the Virtual on the Couch here. I'm here today with Tony Circelli, the Chief Executive of the Environment Protection Authority. And for those who don't know me, I'm David Reynolds, the Chief Executive of the Department of Treasury and Finance and the IPAA SA Vice President. Firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge that the land that Tony and I meet on today is the traditional land of the Kaurna people and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Adelaide region and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the Kaurna people today. I'd also like to acknowledge the partners that help us bring these videos together. That includes IPAA SA, the team there, which do a great job, as well as their major partners in PwC, Flinders University, the Office of the Commissioner for Public Sector Employment, with the Leadership Academy and the Senior Management Council of the Government of South Australia. So welcome, Tony.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, David.
So let's get started with the obvious and easy question. So obviously COVID has been 4 months. It seems like a lot longer now, but it's been 4 months that we've been in this environment. What has it meant for the EPA and for you as a leader in your organisation?
Well, not sure there's any easy questions when it comes to COVID, to be honest. I mean, I think we've all sort of led this similar sort of journey and probably did it, done what we've had to do in our organisation slightly differently. But I know right from the start the uncertainty that this pandemic actually presented itself, and given that we'd never really dealt with this sort of crisis previously, there was a lot of, guesswork really that had to go into our response at that early stage. So I think for us it was trying to figure out what it meant short term, medium term, long term. Of course, there was also we had to sort of consider what it meant for the people that we license and we work with and we engage with as well. So so it was a bit of inward looking in terms of how we're going to respond as an organisation, but also of course, outward-looking as well.
Yeah. So what do you think the biggest couple of challenges were through all that?
Look, for me, it was how you bring sort of business continuity. It was a crisis and some sort of incident management response was clearly needed. And it was really about how you brought, that incident management approach, that business continuity approach into the organisation. It was probably clearer to start off with because we knew we were in incident management. And then as the pandemic sort of grew on and we sort of understood it a bit more, and it progressed, it was sort of how do you then build this into more as a business as usual approach. So I know initially we put a lot of focus on communication, of course. We tried to, right at the outset, figure out what it was that we were trying to achieve, and that was as much about continuing our services, but also ensuring that we took the learnings from what we were doing and how that would help us longer term as well. So we were pretty clear with my management and also with our staff about this. We're in for a long haul here, and this is not just about managing for the time being and then quickly reverting back to a pre-COVID world. It was how do we what does that mean for our longer term operation? So I think that was that sort of tricky balance, I guess, that we were trying to sort of manage.
I think staff all over government have been amazing in terms of responding to the issues that have arisen for COVID, both the service delivery and, in fact, delivering in a different way. I assume that's been the same inside the EPA?
Yeah, look, we had business continuity approaches. Really, we did a lot of work past after the state blackout in 2016, like a lot of people did. So we were actually in a pretty good position. And whilst we didn't sort of predict a pandemic of this nature, we did think about, what happens if we lost the use of our office, for instance, and what would we need to put in place to keep operating our services and be able to communicate with each other. So we had to apply what we had pre-prepared to this particular situation. But the important thing also was, from my perspective, was as well as that preparedness at that corporate level, is actually asking our managers and communicating very quickly with our senior managers around, what's business continuity look like for your particular area of the organisation, because they're all doing different things, and so some of them would be much more prepared to work from home, for instance. Others would never have actually even contemplated working from home. So there were different challenges, and we actually asked each of them to prepare their own business continuity plan up front. Just really start thinking about, well, what does this actually mean more specifically for my group?
Yep. And what advice would you give? So what are the things that you've learnt in terms of talking to teams and to others who are going through this? What advice would you give to some of those leaders of the issues?
Look, I think the key thing is communication, as we know. I mean, it's not rocket science, but I think trying to actually make that happen and be committed to that is not as easy as it sounds. You're still trying to do your work. You're trying to figure out, well, what messages am I actually really needing to sort of give to my people, my executive team. But I think, like, equally, I recall speaking to someone very early on in the piece, and I asked them almost that same question: what can I do to help you? And the response back was, look, just keep communicating with us, even if you've got nothing to say. Just tell us you've got nothing to say. As it happened, we had a lot to say, and there was a lot happening and changing, particularly in those first 6 weeks. And so we, I guess, committed to sort of doing that sort of regular communication, both written, but also we sort of discovered this sort of forum, and we started webinaring. We still are webinaring now with our staff. And that's been really, really well received. We've surveyed our staff probably about 6 weeks ago, and that's the one thing I think that comes up very strong, not only from a corporate perspective, but also from their managers' perspective. They really felt like that, that the communication's been strong, and they've been able to sort of feed up information as well.
And one of the things in that is really looking after our staff to make sure they're being careful. These are unprecedented times for everyone. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. What have you done at the EPA to make sure that you're looking after your staff and their welfare?
Absolutely. Look, I think one of our key mantras as an organisation is health and wellbeing and looking after each other. And we talk about being one team and so forth. And I guess the learning, which again is not unusual in hindsight, but everyone's going to respond quite differently to the situation. Working from home, some people are loving it, some people dislike it. I'm not a great fan of it, but others really appreciate it. Some people aren't really well set up to work from home. I recall seeing a worldwide survey of organisational response to COVID-19, and making a real point around sort of Gen Zs and I guess younger people and people newer to organisations, people that actually need much more I guess support and coaching in terms of where to go to deal with issues. People that might be just starting off and understanding how the organisation works, let alone coming into the public sector early and understanding how the public sector works. And so, some people will respond to those things differently. I guess what we've done really is just to make sure people are aware that different people are going to respond differently, and just because you might be actually feeling okay and feeling like you're dealing with the issue well, don't assume that your colleague or the person that might report to you is feeling the same way. So again, I think communication is really important, just as well as doing the team discussions, ensuring that one-on-one dialogue is happening and getting that feedback from that person. Look, by and large, our staff, I think most organisations have coped pretty well, but of course you're always going to have different scenarios, and we want to make sure that our response is sort of detailed enough to pick up some of those areas or some of those issues where people might not be coping.
And some of this also, of course, gives us opportunity to do things differently and going forward. And we've all learned a lot about the way we do our business and our operations. What do you think you've learned in terms of things that you'll pick up and keep going into the future?
Well, obviously having meetings on Teams has shown us that, there's a very different way of actually operating. All of us, certainly many of us actually deal with colleagues and from interstate, and I had a national meeting this morning. Normally I'd be going to Sydney, I'd be going the night before, and for basically a 2.5-3 hour meeting. and then try and race back to Adelaide. Well, that you just save so much time. So I think there's a real productivity around that, and I think that a lot of the meetings we do are quite capable to be run through Teams and Zoom and so forth. So that's definitely something that we're learning, and of course I think the big cultural change for society has been the fact that everyone's had to learn the technology. This would not have occurred without us having been forced really to learn the technology, and the fact that everyone knows how to use it, some probably better than others, but we all sort of seem to be able to get on and use the technology, share documents online, all that sort of stuff, means that now this is something that we can all use going forward. So that's, I guess, an obvious one. But look, I think more broadly it is, I guess it's changed a lot of our worldviews around the whole concept of working from the office. Some of us have coped with that better, particularly a lot of leaders have, I think some have struggled with that concept of, people having working from home. And my view is it's quite clear. We've looked at how our staff have operated, and we don't seem to have missed a lot. We had to put a few services on pause. So there's definitely something in there, I think, about how do you build that working from home aspect where it obviously makes a big difference for a lot of people. Some people, as I said, don't like it, but a lot of people do. It builds their well-being, and I always say if you've got a happy and an engaged workforce, it only means greater success for your own organisation. They're going to be more committed. They're going to be more connected to what you want to do. I do think there needs to be a balance with the whole work from home issue. I strongly believe that relationships are most effectively built by face-to-face, and so I think there has to be some balance with it, but definitely we shouldn't say, well, that was a COVID-19 measure and we now expect everybody to come back to the office. I think there has to be some balance in there. Yeah, so I think the work, and I guess part of that as well now is this whole concept of recruitment too. I think for organisations, I initially come from Mount Gambier, and I often have conversations with some of my friends still back in Mount Gambier about sometimes the lack of opportunities in the regional areas, and I think the whole concept of working from home and having now much more understanding and maturity around these IT systems means you don't necessarily have to be in Adelaide to work for a company in Adelaide. You might have to commute every once in a while to connect in with the organisation, but I think certainly around the peripheral parts of Adelaide, I think there's something in there about recruitment for us as an organisation too.
And that really goes to one thing we've talked quite a bit about in this On the Couch series, and that's leadership and what our leaders think about leadership during these times. What's sort of your leadership framework or mantra or the way you've approached leadership both before COVID and through it?
Well, I think leadership is, I've always I think put leadership in that area where you're focusing on change, and it's being prepared to change yourself. It's being prepared to lead people through that change, and so there's a whole host of things. So this just this worldview that some of us might still have around this working from home aspect of that we find a lot of our staff working in. Well, I think leadership is about exploring that and not pushing that away too quickly. Even if it doesn't quite fit with what my traditional view of sort of operating in an organisation, and then it's about leadership is also about I'm sort of challenging myself in terms of what this new worldview might be and how our organisation might change. Well, what about the people around me? What about my executive team? What behaviours? What are they saying? What's my role in working with them to sort of come to a different view, and then consequently down through the organisation. And that's where I think leadership is very much. It certainly doesn't sit just with me, of course. It sits with staff as well. It sits with everyone. Everyone has to show a sense of leadership towards putting themselves in a more uncomfortable position, and how do we work through that position.
And of course, like every organisation and every business in South Australia has been affected by COVID. So that would affect the businesses that you license and that you deal with every day out there in the private sector. What have your interactions been like with them and any issues that they've raised? How's that worked from your perspective?
Yeah, we of course, right from the outset were quite conscious about some of the shutdowns that are occurring and whether that would impact on our, I guess, our stakeholder group. We've got a licensee base of around 2,500 SMEs to quite large corporate entities in South Australia. We surveyed them up front. We wanted to know how they were going. We wanted to know whether there might be supply chain issues, if potentially they may have been doing some environmental remediation work or improvements and so forth, but had to get the equipment from outside the country, or even the expertise might be coming from interstate. So we've had a lot of issues from that perspective in terms of supply chain. But by and large, the sector we regulate, so this is the sort of manufacturing and sort of you've got mining, manufacturing, a lot of primary industry manufacturing, waste sector. By and large, they've been pretty good. We haven't had too many that have actually had to shut their doors, and they've had to adapt their businesses. We've also, a lot of our operational roles is to regularly have a look and meet with them, inspect their premises and so forth. And so that's been a bit more complicated in terms of not only for us, from my obligations to keep my staff safe, we need to ask questions of them, but equally they're doing the same thing and asking questions of us. And we've had a few situations where we haven't been able to get entry because there's been issues. So there's been some minor things, but by and large it's gone okay, to be honest. So that was really, again, as much as it's about communication within the organisation, it's also about your stakeholders, and our operations team did, I think, a great job early on, really to engage and connect with the licensee base and just find out if there's anything that we can do to support them, and if there's anything that was being planned that might be a risk, that that we can be aware of that and manage that together.
And again, as normal in these processes, we've had some IPAA members and other participants put some questions to us for me to ask you. So we'll touch on a couple of those as well. The first one being, the current deterrence you have in environmental protection and the approach you take for people who breach their regulations and the rules. What is the basic strategy and approach of the EPA for these organisations? So
we generally take, I guess, a spectrum view of compliance. So if you look at one side of the spectrum, if you look at the positive side of the spectrum, generally in most sectors what we find is maybe 10-15% of the businesses in that sector would do the right thing because their business model relies on it, their branding potentially relies on their environmental and sustainability credentials. And so they're sort of the benchmark group that we try and point others towards, and we try and get others to reach. And we don't do a lot of this work, but we do try and identify best practices, document that up and present that a little bit to show others where we feel that these business practices need to get to, but also as a sense of reward for the people that are already behaving there. Then if you sort of work over to the other side of the spectrum, the red end of the spectrum, generally we find, it could be anywhere but up to 5% of any sector is probably going to do the wrong thing and look for ways of cutting corners. Sometimes that's it might be a financially driven thing. Sometimes it's a much more sinister, where a sinister motive where people are quite happy to put put themselves at a financial benefit to others that are doing the right thing at the expense of that level playing field, but also, of course, at the expense of the environment. And so we don't make too many apologies with that part, and that part of people that are operating like that, and we've got a very strong compliance group, enforcement investigative group in the organisation who do a fantastic job, tough job, but a really important job. And we find that the majority of people that are sitting sort of in the middle and to the right-hand side of this spectrum are urging us to ensure that people sort of aren't, risking the environment, and also, as I say, the fact that they're able to operate like that really undermines the confidence that people have to invest in particular areas as well, because they make these quite substantial investments only to see it sort of be taken away from them because people are undercutting them because they're not doing the right thing. So generally what we find is the vast majority of industries are very keen for us to make sure that some of these sort of willful, non-complying people are taken into account. So that's probably, and then a lot of our work occurs in the middle of this spectrum where, particularly with small, medium enterprises, they generally don't have the capacity, unlike some of the big corporates where they'll have a whole environment team and a sustainability team, and we would engage directly with them. Well, some of the SMEs, of course, are just trying to survive that day, and they're just trying to get to the just try and sort of get to the end of the week often, and don't have that capacity to sort of sit back and step back and really focus on some of the environmental issues. So they need a bit more support. And if there are issues or contraventions and so forth, with those we generally take an escalating approach. So it's working with them, enabling them, helping them wherever we possibly can. If it's repeated failure over a period of time, then we need to step up our approach with them as well. But we've got a really good set of tools before we think about investigations and prosecution and so forth. There's a really quite comprehensive set of tools to help people that are trying to do the right thing but maybe don't have the capacity or capability to do that.
And you talked about having a meeting this morning with other environmental regulators around the country. But what are the big issues that are facing? I mean, there's lots of issues which get to the media that we kind of hear about, which is issues of pollution and even sort of wood smoke issues in local areas. But what are the real issues that are on the agenda for environmental regulators around the country over the next year or two? What are the big things that are coming up?
Look, firstly, I guess there's a chemicals agenda that's always pretty pointy one, and we've got a few issues at the moment in terms of we released some results last week around West Lakes and some historic contamination that that's been brought to our attention now and we're sort of dealing with. So they're always quite tricky things. Sometimes the risk associated with those issues may not be that great. But certainly the communication and the understanding and that reassurance to the community is quite a challenge sometimes to get in there quickly and actually say, well, this is actually what it is and this is actually what it isn't. So that's actually a big part of what regulators are doing now in terms of that chemical space and that public health space is really, we're equipped well with scientists and engineers and investigators and lawyers, but have we equipped ourselves well with community engagement people, outreach people? And so that's quite an important reform that we've put in place over the last few years. It's made a big difference in that chemicals legacy and public health space. The other area that all the other EPAs and other jurisdictions are quite challenged with really is in the waste and resources sector. It's an area that South Australia has really done very well over the last 10, 15, 20 years, which is reduce the amount of material that's actually going to landfill and recover that material, recognising the amount of energy and water and resources that have gone into producing a lot of these products. For that just to be wasted and put into landfill is really a lost opportunity. And so everyone's really going down this path of what we call the circular economy, which effectively means try as much as possible to keep that material that we use in the productive economy as long as possible. And that not only is a great sustainability and a great environmental initiative, but we know from an economic perspective, it creates a whole new sector. We've got a very strong resource recovery sector here. It by far outweighs the amount of people that are employed in landfilling, which is the historic way of dealing with our waste. So we know, we've seen through evidence, even here in South Australia, that if we can actually do more with our resources, it is a good sustainability issue in terms of conserving our resources, but it's also a good economic. It's something you'd be very happy with, David, with jobs and economy and income into the state. Nationally, at the moment, we have a real debate around a lot of our recovered resources from our waste streams have historically been exported internationally, particularly to China, and China's put much more stringent standards on the import of those materials. This happened a year ago before, I guess the increasing issues that I guess we've got with exports to China. So really what we're saying, and interesting, this has been also progressed with COVID, is how do we manage this material ourselves? And of course, COVID has also raised that to a more broader extent. How do we stand on our own 2 feet when we have these sorts of crises? What are the key things that we need to produce here in Australia? Well, we've been having that discussion with that waste sector probably for a couple of years now, and there is opportunity. There's certainly opportunity for industries that haven't been part of that agenda to come into that agenda and look at maybe how they could complement their existing operations, their existing manufacturing approaches, to be part of that circular economy. So they're probably the 2 key areas. One's around public health and the other one's around that sustainability and circular economy agenda.
Excellent. All right, well, that's about all. We've just about out of time here. So thank you for your insights and that information. It's really useful and interesting for everybody. We're interested in what else it is you were thinking before you came to this chat that you wanted to sort of share with everybody, and what are your sort of final thoughts?
Oh, probably maybe just summarising some of those things. I think there's probably 3 things. One, in this COVID world, particularly as leaders in organisations, and as I said, leaders throughout the organisation, to really look after each other, and I think colleagues to really look after each other. And I do think about my own children, sort of late teenagers, early 20s, and the negative messages that they're getting and they've had for a number of years, but how that's so concentrated in the last 4 or 5 months, and our roles as leaders really to say, look, there is opportunity. What a great place we are in South Australia, and the opportunities that we have in South Australia, and try and maintain that positive mindset for our children. But I think in the workplace, it's very much about looking after each other and looking after our colleagues. I think the second part around organisations is really around challenging our worldview about what an organisation looks like and how it should operate, and use the last, this is going to continue obviously, but use this experience as a way of building the strength and the capability and the I guess our cultures within our organisations, rather than see it as an aberration and we're going to go back to how we used to be. So I think there's something in that. And probably finally, just on the environmental side, is think about sustainable development in this recovery phase as well. So we're all talking about recovery and what we want to see from a recovery, what type of industries and so forth. And I do think that there's, we've seen how, just with air quality and these sorts of things, as COVID hit, how we've actually had better air quality, we've had a big reduction worldwide in terms of carbon dioxide and so forth. So we know we have an impact on the environment. So I think one of the challenges is, as we come out of COVID-19 and we're looking for the industries of the future, how do you get that economic and environmental and social wellbeing equation around sustainability working for us? Because we know it's going to be good for the economy, but we also know longer term it's going to be this, it will create the environment which I know and we know that our kids will appreciate and thrive in going forward.
That's a great way to finish, to remind ourselves what a great place South Australia is and the great opportunities we have here and a great future that we have. So Thank you for your time, Tony, and thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you.